We're going to give another moment for folks to come on in. We are live. All right. Let's get started. So congratulations and happy Pup Day, Rachel. And good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Kay from Greenlight, and we're thrilled to host tonight's event with Rachel Krantz launching her new book, Open, an uncensored memoir of love, liberation, and non-monogamy. She'll be talking with Jen Winston, so you are in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Rachel, to Jen, and the team at Harmony for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Although we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Now, just a couple of housekeeping things. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. It's a great way to show your appreciation for the authors and interact with fellow attendees. If you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the authors, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A module to be answered in the later part of the program. And importantly, tonight's featured book, Open, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. at both our Fulton Street and Flatbush Ave stores, where you can purchase Rachel's book and many others on site. You can also order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll drop the buy link in the chat. As thanks for attending tonight's virtual event, we are offering 10% off the featured book. Enter coupon code GreenlightEvents10 into the coupon discount section at checkout online for 10% off. And very fun, today, Rachel stopped by our store to sign copies. And so you can get a signed copy by request while supplies last. Make sure to indicate your signed copy request in order comments at checkout, or look for signed copies when you visit the store. And rumor has it, Rachel signed different things in each book. So you get a fun little scavenger hunt while you come in. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. Our interviewer tonight is Jen Winston. Jen Winston, she, they, is a writer and bisexual whose work focuses on dating, queerness, and the millennial condition. They are the author of the critically acclaimed book, Greedy, Notes from a Bisexual Who Wants Too Much, which Oprah magazine called provocative and profound, funny and frank. Paper Mag wrote that Jen's debut is at once relatable, laugh out loud funny, and refreshingly illuminating. BuzzFeed named Greedy a best LGBTQ+ book of 2021, calling it more insightful about identity than any book this year, and which Greenlight launched last October. Jen currently lives in Brooklyn with her partner, dogs, and iPhone. You can follow Jen on Twitter, Instagram, and alas, TikTok at Generous, Jenerous. They will be speaking with our featured author, Rachel Krantz, the namer of Bustle, one of the 3 founding editors. No big deal. Rachel's work has been featured on NPR, Vox, The Guardian, Vice, and many other outlets. She's the recipient of the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award, the Investigative Reporters and Editors Radio Award, the Peabody Award, and the Edward R. Murrow Award for her work as an investigative reporter with YR Media. Her new book, Open, is an unprecedented exploration of polyamory from an award-winning journalist chronicling her first open relationship with unflinching candor. It was named one of the most anticipated books of 2022 by the Los Angeles Times, Autostraddle, and Electric Lit. Rachel is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then she'll be talking with Jen and with all of you. Please take it away, Rachel and Jen.
Thank you so much, Greenlight Bookstore, Jen. I'm so excited to share this with you and my Harmony Books team, and most of all, my friends who I'm seeing in the chat and family who I love so much. And it's so special that we can be together in this way for it. And even though I'm not going to be looking exactly at the chat as we go through, I wanted to let you know I am going to look at it all afterwards. So feel free to participate and maybe we can all feel a little more like we're together. I'm going to read just a couple pages. It'll be 4 minutes. And this is from the first chapter of the book. It takes place, just to set the stage, on my second date with Adam before we've even kissed. And he's been giving me like a foot and leg massage for the last several hours as we're engaged in deep conversation. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, am I being dangerous here that I put myself in his home on the second date? I knew it was unfortunately normal. I was worried about running out of time to be enduringly lovable at the ripe old age of 27. But I also knew normal is not necessarily the same thing as natural. I'd have told you vehemently that people socialized as women are taught to think about their life's potential this way, and how this conditioning is, by design, profoundly limiting. I felt the pressure to find my ideal other before it was too late, regardless. Yet, I also had little genuine desire to settle down. It was hard to imagine being so sure about anyone that I'd want to give up my favorite feeling/drug, falling in love with someone new. Nearly every time I liked someone enough to sleep with them, post-coital armpit hair would mix with Old Spice and I'd latch on till I tired of the smell, roughly 8 to 20 months later. In each relationship, I'd gradually lost my attraction and felt stifled imagining a future of kissing only that one person, no matter how well they kissed. I couldn't stand not being able to do whatever I wanted with my life, even when what I wanted was only the abstract possibility of future romantic adventures. I never cheated. I dumped people when they most expected it. And though I'd loved, I'd never felt fully vulnerable. I was sick of my self-protective romantic pattern, and yet here I was, going over to Adam's house days after my latest breakup so that he could audition for the role of next boyfriend. Or, ideally, if I was honest, the one who would put my restlessness to bed so I could arrive at my adult life. So fucking dumb, Rachel. But then again, just to argue the other side, he does seem like an unusually strong contender. As I lay back like a queen on Adam's couch, I felt myself bloom in his hands. So maybe I didn't need to wear tight clothing, ask ingratiating questions, convince myself I was riveted when I was only intrigued. Instead of controlling the ride, maybe I could finally relax and let someone else drive. I could get used to this. I began to fantasize about a new life, one filled with 5-hour foot rubs, surrounded by knowledge I'd absorbed mostly through osmosis. Jesus, what the hell is wrong with you? You don't even know this guy. Don't fall for it. There was definitely still something hard to read about him, oddly serious and unconcerned with politeness. Granted, he had the angular jaw and strong brow bone of Jake Gyllenhaal, Jewish looking only in his dark curls and the tasteful smattering of chest hair peeking through his shirt. Yes, he'd seemingly read everything I'd meant to, written 2 books, was pleasurably tall and muscular, taught at a graduate level. Fine, he was clearly the kind of grown-ass man I'd begun to believe was above my pay grade in Brooklyn, had lamented to my straight girlfriends we'd never find if we stayed in the land of spoiled hipster man children. But there had to be a catch. There was always a catch. What is it? He asked. Tell me. I'd learned it was one of his favorite commands. Tell me. I just got out of a relationship and I promised myself I wouldn't. That's fine. There's no obligation here. His gaze was so hawk-like, penetrating yet calm. I am looking for a partner, someone to share my life with, and I like you, but we're not even close to that yet. Of course, I know. I looked down. I sound like a silly little girl. But since we're talking about it, you should know something else about me. So here it was. I readied myself. If you were to become that partner for me, I would never restrict you. What do you mean you wouldn't restrict me? I asked cautiously. I mean that you could still date and sleep with other people, even fall in love again. I don't want to restrict my partner's experiences, Adam said, maintaining firm eye contact, speaking slowly like he was delivering good news in a new language. If you were my primary partner, I would just need to feel privileged and know what's going on in your experiences outside the relationship. As long as you were honest and safe, you would be free to do whatever you wanted. Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading that. It takes me back to the beginning of A Wild Ride, which is the beginning of your book. And thank you so much for having me here today. I feel like overjoyed to be here celebrating this moment with you. I'm like looking at my notes and I'm getting emotional because I'm remembering how emotional I was when I finished your book. Truly, it was one of those moments where I had like a kind of out of body, like, wow, that was just like, that just made me a better person. And I understand the world and myself so much more because of it. So really, I think everyone is in for a treat. I got to show off that I have 2 copies of the hardcover and a galley. So I'm the open super fan over here. So everyone can aspire to this level of fandom. But I just want to say your book is beautiful and it's also incredibly queer. And I think that's another reason I'm so excited to be here today. I wrote a book all about my own imposter syndrome around bisexuality, and you and I have had so many conversations about bisexuality and what it means to both of us. And I would just love to hear you talk a bit more about that journey, what your bisexuality means to you, and kind of what this book helped you discover about the term.
Yes, thank you so much, Jen. And it's so special to share this with you because your book and the conversations with you have really helped me so much. It was amazing to me, realizing that I could have written this book detailing my relationship with a woman, my other romantic and sexual experiences with women, my feelings, knowing in myself really for sure that I am attracted to women and non-binary and trans people for a long time, but having written it really fully accepted that more, or so I thought, until I talked with you and realized I was still uncomfortable using the label bisexual. I was still struggling with feeling like I deserved to say that because I had a misunderstanding before I read your book of what bisexual means. I thought it was more binary. I thought it meant it had to be a perfect, even 50-50 split in all times, that it was more of a verb than an identity. And I felt so much imposter syndrome since I was a kid. And, there's probably some people watching who are friends or family members who don't even know this about me because I didn't even come out formally because I didn't feel I deserved to, which is, I would learn, pretty common as an experience, and probably one of the reasons that bisexual women have the highest rate of sexual assault, higher rate of mental illness, eating disorders, and drug abuse than gay or straight populations. And I just think that part of the reason for that is you're kind of, like you've written about, told you're both too much and don't exist at the same time. And it's so easy to hide within straightness, as I did for a long time, and to even let your queer community, which I always had around me, I always had queer friends. But I think sometimes I often felt, until writing this book and sharing this process with them, even misunderstood by them, or that there's some degree of gatekeeping from the queer community that I experienced. And so I just felt like I didn't know what I was, I didn't know where I fit. And this book has helped me a lot to just own that label more fully, but not really till I talked to you did I start to own it. And it's really true what you said. It feels like a huge fucking weight lifted. So thank you.
I mean, thank you. You've helped me own it more too. I love our talks, and I'm glad that now everyone gets to listen to them. I mean, you talk a bit about the community and like having a queer community around you, and I think that was something that was so interesting to me about your book, was kind of like learning about the people who you surrounded yourself with, and obviously, like, you know, we both wrote memoirs. As memoir writers, it's challenging to kind of heed this age-old piece of advice that you get in writing courses and, you know, just passed down in MFAs, is to not talk about writing in your work. That's something people often say is like too much inside baseball. And I loved that your book just didn't do that. Like, I loved that it talked about writing and the process of writing so much. And I think that obviously that was like inherent to the reported memoir genre that you like. I mean, you're the first reported memoir that I have read, especially about polyamory. But I'm just, it really made me love you as a person, because it just made me feel very connected to you as a writer, like intrinsically that being who you are, and this book being an extension of that experience. And so I especially found it interesting. There's like a scene where you talk about you're on vacation with a bunch of like hot swingers, and you're talking about writing this book. And I'm like, oh my God, what? Like, that's so like, just brave of you to be so out there with it. And so I guess, at what point did you realize that your lifestyle and your life was worth writing a book about? And how did the people around you react to you sharing the plan to write it and them being in it?
Yeah. Well, so the idea of the book happened when an agent approached me when I had pretty newly opened up the relationship on Adam's end as well. So in the beginning, I was nervous about non-monogamy, but fell very quickly and intensely in love with Adam. And he would bring it up. Remember, I'm non-monogamous and you're free to do whatever you want. And I would get nervous. And he said, okay, how about I'll be monogamous until you say otherwise, but you can do whatever you want. And so for the first year, I didn't experience any jealousy. Then I did. And I started writing all these articles to process it. Not so much about my experience, but literally reporting on it, asking interviews, reading all the books. What is jealousy? What's the psychology behind it? How do you tackle it? Which is just kind of working at Bustle. That's what I was already doing. I was in that machine of often writing personal essays in a day that, live forever on the internet now, unfortunately. But this agent approached me and she was like, you should write a book about this. I haven't seen something that blends someone who's actually living this with journalism. And I said, yeah, you're right. But like, I am like sick, literally sick to my stomach right now. Like, I am not an expert in this. I cannot write a book about this. And she said, well, just start writing things down. And so that idea, I'd already been keeping a detailed journal. But as the relationship progressed and my experiences got more and more intense and frequent and confusing, this idea of a book one day became a sort of very elaborate writerly coping mechanism. So it really is a part of the story. I wasn't sure that I would ever write it. I really didn't know. So like when I met those swingers, I said, I might write a book about this someday. I was there reporting an article, so they knew that. But in terms of stuff with other people, certain interviews that happened along the way, conversations. And with Adam, he was very generous that he allowed me to record a lot of our relationship, arguments, serious discussions, every couples therapy session. I recorded every therapy session I had. So this was like, some pretty ridiculous amount of recording. And I think that as things became more steeped in gaslighting, and he was telling me often that I was remembering things wrong or that my viewpoint was basically unreliable or incorrect. And I was smoking more and more weed to cope. I was like, I need to have some solid record of something like reality, if reality even exists. And the idea of a book one day was like, if there's only two ways this can end, either like I'm going to transform and I'm going to be good at polyamory now and we'll be like together forever. And I don't know how I'll write that book, but whatever. Or I'll have to find a way to get out of this situation that's increasingly bad, and it'll have been for something bigger than just me. So it was this kind of light at the end of the tunnel of like, I feel so shitty right now often and confused, but maybe this will be about something more one day. But I really wasn't sure I was going to actually do it until much later.
Well, I'm very glad you did. And I do think it was for something bigger than yourself, but I mean, for yourself, but it really had a profound effect on me, and I'm sure it will have a profound effect on a lot of people. And I learned so much about non-monogamy and like the experience of being in a non-monogamous relationship. And the way that you explore that is not just by looking at your own relationship, but also by looking at the dynamics between those infamous swingers and just so many other people you interact with throughout the text. But early on, I think it was like the first time you and I chatted, you mentioned that you were a bit nervous about knowing that your relationship wasn't like this perfect polyamorous relationship. You say like good at polyamory. And I mean, obviously there was gaslighting and there was deceit and there was fighting, and there were even more extreme violations than that. And I really appreciated how you kind of navigated the gap between what your character was going through on a surface level of like, you know, lots of fun, like group sex and stuff, and then what was going on a deeper level with the relationship dynamic. So I'm curious how you feel this book, which is obviously about like a flawed yet very real, incredibly real, reported real relationship, fits into the kind of non-monogamy canon, knowing that it isn't this like storybook polyamorous romance. Did you have any fears about being true to that experience, especially knowing that non-monogamy is still stigmatized and misunderstood?
Yes, I definitely had a lot of fear around that, and you see me even grappling with it throughout the book, like in my conversation with Aisha, who, you know, special shout out to them if they're here, helped me a lot throughout the process of this, living it and beyond afterwards as an advisor on this book. And yeah, I was just already afraid of, I can't write a book because it's going to make non-monogamy look bad, you know? And I think that the way I have come to a certain peace with that, and I still do have those fears. I still know that some people are going to read this and it's going to confirm negative stereotypes because some negative things happen that adhere to the stereotypes. But it's also a work of nonfiction, and this is what happened. And I hope that people see that there's a lot of nuance to it, and also like see the other representations of all the people who are doing it in the book much better, and how it's so much less about the relationship model or dynamic itself being inherently better or worse or enlightened or not, and about the power dynamics that exist between the people and how their communication actually is. And I think you really see clearly what's so exciting about it for me, and also the reasons it's breaking down. But I was also really moved by Carmen Maria Machado writes in The Dream House about her fears about talking about a relationship that was also characterized by a lot of gaslighting, and in that case abuse, and just the pressure when you're part of any marginalized, misunderstood group to kind of whitewash things and not talk about what was going wrong. But then I thought back to when I was going through this and looking through all these books, and so many of them were helpful to me, but most of them were how-to guides, or most of what I found were, if they were memoir, it was like people who had been in successful long-term open marriages and who were older than me. And I felt further isolated because I didn't see any representation of someone who was very confused like I was, who was on the one hand feeling increasingly sexually and emotionally and yeah, all these ways liberated and kind of sinking and like feeling more and more entrapped, and that there was all kinds of drama happening. So I kind of came to a place where I feel like it's important to have those flawed depictions, because otherwise it'll never have real acceptance, because it's just like then polyamorous people are just like these weird aliens who are only in perfect relationships and never get jealous. And it's kind of another sort of box that you have to be put in, where you erase your experience and where it's like not allowed to be a way to be unless it's perfect, which just seems very unfair, because of course, anytime you have two or more people coming together, you're going to have any range of outcomes. You're going to have beautiful outcomes. You're going to have horrible outcomes. That is certainly true of monogamy. We have a ton of examples of that throughout all of literature. But because non-monogamy is still so taboo and people are just fighting to have basic acceptance, have no civil protections, it's still quite difficult to talk about the nuances and the things that can go wrong.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that like having to kind of be perfect is a very unique type of pressure that also affects bi people a lot. So being at that intersection for you is very interesting. I also found you talked a bit about like I don't remember exactly what you called it, but I'm going off book here. Monogamous privilege, or like the just sort of the very nuanced oppression that people in non-monogamous relationships face, like not being able to talk about it at work, and it being kind of stigmatized and looked down upon at work, and hypersexualized, and that just added a lot of context for me. So I found just so many of the like I had dog-eared every page of my galley because I lost the bookmark you sent me. So but yeah, it just, there's so much depth in this book that you really covered all that ground that you just kind of spoke to so beautifully. Going back to the idea of a reported memoir, can you talk a bit about what that is and kind of what your method was? I mean, you mentioned you recorded the conversations, but just to kind of get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, so a reported memoir is, first person, often has mainly narrative components, but it also uses reporting and research to contextualize that story. And to me, that's always just kind of been the natural way I write. But, shout out to my editor, Donna Lafredo, who really, the proposal I sold was very different. It was going to be less narrative. It was kind of the one my then agent encouraged. It was going to be more kind of like profiling a different style of non-monogamy each chapter, and then I would kind of come in and out. But I sent her very early on. I was like, I have some chapters, but it's more like memoir. And she said, well, just send it to me. And when I did, she was like, yeah, this is good. Like, you should go in this narrative direction, but still report. And she said to me, something I'll be so grateful for always: just write the book you want to write. And I didn't really think I was capable of, like something that was in 8 sections of profiling different styles of non-monogamy. Okay, that's like 8 magazine articles, right? But I didn't really know like I could do something narrative that would read in a page-turning way that was novelistic. But I found it was quite fun to figure it out, and to use kind of this book I found called The Heroine's Journey as a sort of template that I could make a timeline of the most important events and people and experiences. And I found how naturally it lined up in so many ways. And that was so validating and interesting. And then just a cool model to also like subvert and talk about on a meta level, because it's so traditionally, masculine and Western. And so it just felt kind of funny to me to have this like sexual odyssey that's about my own inner quest for figuring out what is romantic liberation, and the battles I'm doing are much more inner battles than outer.
Yeah, well, and that actually is a perfect segue to my next question. Because you were like documenting your relationships as you were living them, when you went back to kind of revisit those like hours of recording, as you've gone through this like massive personal growth journey, how was that? How did that change your perspective on what had happened and what the book was going to be?
Yeah, I mean, it was nuts. I had just amassed way too much material because it wasn't just the audio recording, of which I had days worth at that point, but also just the way we all live now, like going through all the emails, all my journal entries I had kept the whole time, the text messages, the dating app messages, like we're all living life on the record to some degree, but I had taken it to an extreme degree. And I spent way too much of my book advance getting it all transcribed, or a lot of it transcribed. And it quickly became clear to me that I was not ready to go through all of it, that it was going to be kind of emotional cutting to go through every single couples therapy session, for example, and just too much material. So I was lucky that I had marked along the way a couple things like in my phone memos of like, this was really important. And I decided to just be selective about picking certain conversations that I thought were like really indicative of what I remembered certain time periods being like. I think you were asking me also, like, how did it change my thoughts to go through those records, right?
I mean, yeah. How did it feel to like?
Oh, how did it feel? I simultaneously felt a lot of compassion for myself and kind of pride of like, oh, honey, especially like reading these transcripts and seeing how I was actually often being talked to and how confused I was for so much of it and just clearly struggling, like to see that in print, it helped me form a certain distance and feel compassion. And I also felt like, oh, that's cool. Like, that's a pretty badass coping mechanism you formed there. Like you were, getting gaslit all the time and your response was going to be like, I'm going to record this shit so that I have some record of this. I don't know what's happening now. So I felt like that pride, but I also felt, some kind of like, oh God, this is like next level crazy. And like, not a way I want to probably continue living my life. I'm sure I'll always do some recording, but like this was too much. And it was such a lesson in like, if you just try to hold on to everything, on some level, it can be very satisfying because you see how there's this, I call it the accidental poetry of everyday life in the book, like these synchronicities and poetic moments that are always happening all around us all the time. And because I was like recording and viewing it through this lens of this imaginary future book, I was noticing all of it. And I love that part of it. But the flip side of that was that everything's impermanent and we're not meant to hold on to everything. And here I was just kind of trying to grab it before it slipped away. And it's not really a great way to live life long term.
Yeah, it is sort of the memoirist condition though, because I kind of like would, go through my life looking for that poetry. So I really related to a ton of those moments in the book. And I mean, that's just incredible to hear you share all the work that had gone into it. And I think like other reported memoirs, like I've seen one, I have read them. I've read ones that like involve, reporting on the just core topic that it's reporting on. But yours, like the way that you took a journalistic lens to your own life is just fascinating and something I have not seen. So just, of course, so well done. I want to make sure we save room for questions. So just a few more from me. Also just a reminder for everyone to enter questions into the Q&A module. You should be able to click it at the bottom of your screen if you're watching on desktop. I want to dive into your subtitle, which is an uncensored memoir of love, liberation, and non-monogamy. I really love the way that liberation in that subtitle kind of took on a double entendre. Like as I was finished with the book, it meant something different to me than it meant before I had started the book. And I just like, I love looking at at the book right now and, seeing all that breadth to it. So I would love for you to talk a bit about what the word liberation means to you now and how that definition has evolved.
Thank you. I love that question. Well, I think at first I thought of liberation back then, especially as it related to like sexual or romantic liberation in a sort of, I don't know, almost like capitalistic, like relationship escalator. Polyamorous people will often refer to that mentality of like, okay, like you just keep going and going, and it keeps building, and then you like reach this point of liberation and you're good. Like, and then you're just gonna have like the most mind-blowing orgasm and now you're liberated. And it's like, no, that's not a thing. It's much like, the idea of like enlightenment in Buddhism is not a point you reach. It's like a moment that keeps repeating, that you keep coming back to, basically like just being present. And I guess that's more how I would define liberation now. Liberation to me would be continuing to just feel freer and freer, more and more generous, more present and loving and compassionate and alive, and less like I'm, trying to stay one step ahead of my own life, but like really being here, like right now, this is it. This is happening, like I'm doing the thing, and like let's just enjoy it in the moment instead of, thinking about something else or performing or whatever. To me, liberation would just be like being here for it. Yeah.
And so that's like another thing that I just loved while reading your book. There's so many like nuggets of incredible life advice, because you talk to so many people who are like the most brilliant people in their relative fields, and like I just saw like the tactics you had about rain, I believe. Can you remind us what that means?
Oh yeah, that I got from a teacher named Tara Brock, who's like a psychologist and meditation teacher that really helped me come back to my own sense of trust in reality and my own mind. And yeah, that's just the idea of this acronym of recognize, accept, investigate, and nurture. And it's kind of this different steps that's really good to look up, but kind of being able to recognize feelings that are going on and you sit with them, see how they're felt in your body. And then most importantly, that last step of and nurture is like to learn how to be your own parent, your own mentor, your own soulmate, really. And just to be able to tell yourself, to check in and tell yourself like what you most need to hear in that moment to be comforted and to be okay. That's been an important thing for me, for sure, to learn how to do that, because I think that you really see me at the beginning of the book having, like the part I read, I'd absorbed this narrative of like, I need someone to, I need to find the one before it's too late, in the sense of like, all women are cast as like anxious Cinderellas, and we don't know exactly when the clock's going to strike midnight, but it's going to be sooner than men, right? And I knew that was bullshit, but I was feeling it anyway. And then I sort of leaned into that fantasy so intensely with Adam. Jen left. Maybe cut off. I'll just finish my answer. I leaned into that fantasy so intensely that when it imploded, I kind of sensed more expansive possibilities for what might be on the other end, and learning to be my own person was a really important part of that, being my own nurturer and protector.
I'm no Jen, but while we wait for Jen to come back, there are some questions and some folks who have just been commenting in the chat. I don't know how much you've been able to see of that, Rachel, of folks just really thanking you for your work.
You, everyone, I'm going to read through all of it after.
There's a question I wanted to bump before it got buried in the chat. That Alexander asked, in light of your experience, what strategies, communication, ritual, celebration, agreements, etc., do you feel are essential for success for non-monogamous relationships?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's a big one. I mean, I think that my advice for non-monogamous relationships is actually not that different from monogamous ones, which is like you need to have mutual respect and trust and clear communication and come at each other with compassion even when you disagree. So those things are the same. I think what's particular for non-monogamy or people who practice kink or just anyone who's kind of seen as on the outskirts or shameful somehow, it's especially important to find community and to find support, whether it be Facebook groups online or local meetups. And also, ideally, if you can, a counselor who's friendly to the lifestyle and is not going to ascribe any problems in your life to being inherently just about the fact that you're non-monogamous or whatever. That's very important. And I also give people resources in the book throughout in the footnotes, different ideas of like, oh, okay, here's how you might do this safely, or different tips, and even like hotlines you can call and different places to find that kind of help.
That's amazing. That was a big question to ask, Alexander. But thank you, Rachel. That's really helpful. And especially for folks who haven't read the book yet, knowing going into reading this experience that there will be that help in it. I think when a lot of people read memoirs, they can't help but feel the compassion and like, oh no, like you were feeling looking back on your own transcripts and wanting to help. So I think it's really invaluable to not just have had that research you did for yourself as a journalist, but then to make something and give it away by offering that to others who are reading it as well. We thank you, Alexander. We have some more questions coming in now. So thanks, folks, for getting your questions in. This is from Irene. There's quite a bit here. So thank you, Irene, for sharing. This is both for commenting on Jen's book, Greedy, as well as yours, Rachel. Jen, I sobbed when I finished Greedy because I felt so seen. Rachel, my copy of Open is in the mail. Welcome back, Jen.
I'm so sorry.
No worries.
I was standing there for a while thinking that it was you. And I was like, is this okay, guys? Like, but okay.
We
so
jumped
sorry.
into questions and
we just jumped into questions. So Jen, if you'd like, I actually just started reading the first question at the top of the Q&A module from Irene, which she addresses your work as well as Rachel's. It's that paragraph you see there.
I actually don't have access to the questions now.
Oh no.
Are there more? I guess if you want to read.
Yeah. Oh, sure. So Jen, I sobbed when I finished Greedy because I felt so seen. Rachel, my copy of Open is in the mail. I am currently working on my own memoir about non-monogamy and sexuality, and my inner saboteur sometimes looks to these two books as reasons mine doesn't need to be written. I do often remind myself that the world needs more queer polyam narratives. Yes, it does. But it would mean so much to me if you could offer any words of encouragement. Thank you, Irene, for sharing that.
Yes, please do it. I mean, I think that it's so much pressure that I have felt in this, of just because there are so few mainstream representations. It's like, it's not just my story. Now it's going to be representing like all non-monogamous relationships. And that's ridiculous. Like we've talked about, that's impossible. I am just one person who had one experience in one period of my life. And so the more narratives we can have out there, and the more diverse and varied and honest they are, the more other people will feel seen and represented, and people will build empathy, and will just generally have less shame and more expansive possibilities. So I think we absolutely need to hear your story, and I hope you write it, and feel free to reach out to me if you do. You know, like I want to support however I'm able to.
I second that, and that's like so well said. I think the idea, the danger of, you know, being the danger of a single story, the danger of being the thinking of yourself as like at the front of the telling those stories, or like it's really hard on yourself as a writer, and it's really like it's not the goal. Like neither Rachel nor I want to be the only people
Poster children
telling my stories at all. So please make us less lonely. Yeah, I can't wait to read it. Okay, I have another question. This one's from Jade. How did non-monogamy affect the platonic relationships in your life? Did you find your community expanding, changing, etc.?
Oh, I love that question. I don't think I've been asked that yet. It did change the platonic relationships in my life in that there was sometimes more fluidity than ever before. So I think I had a lot of experiences like with the swingers and with Miranda, who's the woman I date and have a really meaningful relationship, then that kind of transitions in a different direction, and our relationship continues to be very fluid in a way that feels very natural. So I think it did give me more of a sense of like fluidity and being able to go from romantic to friendship or friendship to romantic without so much pressure on it, I guess. Otherwise, I think it made me just a better friend, hopefully, and a more honest friend, because I had such, so many of my friends who are here tonight have been so amazing to me during this really hard period in my life where I was like, I was hiding a lot of stuff because that's one of the characteristics of feeling isolated and marginalized and all of that. But I also leaned on certain friends a lot, and just seeing, I don't think I'd ever leaned on people that hard before or felt like I needed my friends so very much to help me find a way through, that I think it gave me a lot of humility going forward for whatever they're going through, and also just a commitment to being really loyal and paying that kindness forward.
Beautifully said. Okay, we have a question from Rebecca Cohen. Being at the intersection of bi and poly, how do you navigate the stereotypes of bi folks being greedy? This is coming from a bi person who is poly curious, and yes, that's a nod to Jen's book too.
Yes. Well, I love that question because Jen and I have a whole conversation a lot about this that's up on Medium. So you can check that out for a more thorough exploration of this. But, one of the things Jen and your book really helped me realize was like this, and you cite the work of Sherry Eisner, which says like this idea of confused that bi people have as a stereotype, like that we view that as a negative thing, but they sort of reframe it as like confusion is an agent for social change and questioning binaries and all these potentially positive things. And that's part of why people find people who don't fit in boxes so threatening. And so I think you, in a similar way, Jen, encouraged me of like, why is it bad to be greedy? What's the slut shaming, socialization behind that made me feel like I shouldn't be greedy? And that's a lot of the journey you see me going on with Adam, is because it was such a radical paradigm shift where not only was he very much wanting me to be non-monogamous, but it turned out his kink was to see me with other men, or to have competition of me with other men. And so it was like the first time that now all of a sudden me going after whatever I wanted and being free in that way, or greedy, quote unquote, was actually like a positive thing, or was seen as something that added to my value mystique. And I think just how radical a shift that was, and how much I realized it changed my feelings of possibility and allowance for myself, it made me really realize how much I'd internalized that message. But also, one last thing I'll say about that is like, you see a really probably like one of the darkest points of the book, something pretty bad happens to me. And I look myself in the mirror and I say, like, you know, you're bi, you're kinky, you're polyamorous. What did you expect to happen to you, greedy slut? And I remember saying that to myself and sort of knowing it was bullshit, but also really feeling it. And this kind of message I'd internalized that if I was going to explore my desires fully and authentically, that was going to have consequences. And so simply by being true to myself, that was risky behavior in our society. But what was risky? That I was just doing what I wanted to do, right? But I'd internalize that message for sure. So now I think I, thanks to your book, own the label of greedy more than before.
Well, I mean, you live it beautifully. And yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that I will just add to that, the reason that I chose greedy as my book title is because it allowed me to kind of explore bisexuality from specifically like a sex positive lens. Like, it's the one bi stereotype that is really rooted in horophobia, sex phobia. And it writing a book about non-monogamy is like inherently you have to take that on. And so and you have to take on like all the patriarchal elements that come with it. And again, you did it in such a wonderful, nuanced, and intersectional way across all of these different parameters. Okay, we have a few more questions, so I'm gonna just jump into them. This is from Shannon. In hindsight, and with the personal growth that you've clearly gone through, what advice do you have for others who are perhaps navigating relationships like the one you had with Adam?
Well, I think, first there's the advice I gave Alex about communication, mutual respect, getting help, not being isolated. That's all the non-monogamy piece of it. But if they're referring to a situation where there's a lot of gaslighting, where someone feels like they're beginning to lose trust in their own sense of judgment or reality, or told often by their partner that they're incorrect, that they shouldn't share doubts about their relationship with anyone else because that'll incriminate people against the partner. All these kinds of warning signs that are very predictable and incremental and confusing. I hope that the book will be helpful and kind of, I really like Roxane Gay at, I think, the beginning of Hunger has something where she says, like, I think I'm going to mess it up now, but it's like, basically, this isn't a how-to guide, it's an atlas. And I think that that's kind of how I view this book, is it's not a how-to guide. It's a lot of like, you're going to learn a lot of things and learn from my mistakes, but it's also just, seek out, I guess, other narratives of people who have gotten through this, and also be kind and patient with yourself in understanding that it's, when you're locked in a dynamic like this, you don't want to ignore yourself and push it down, but it's very complex because you love the person and they often love you, and they're not all bad or evil or some way it's often cast. You're locked in a dynamic that's very difficult. And so getting help with that and reading more about that, and just seeing that it is possible life on the other side, if you're not sure, if you can't imagine it anymore, which I knew I got to a point where I couldn't imagine that I would even function on my own. And it's just not true. So hopefully I'm hoping this book will join a canon of many others who help people in that situation.
You are absolutely thriving. And just want to underscore that. And I think that was great advice. I love that quote also. And your book really, really does do that. Like, I learned about so many other authors and just, things I wanted to delve into studying. the heroine's journey, I'm glad you brought that up, because I really loved how you kind of wove that thread in throughout, and I had never heard of it, and you just introduced it with context, and then I felt like I had kind of loosely studied it through you, so I really appreciated just all the visibility you gave to so many other works and writers.
That was really important to me, because this book was me promising to myself, if I ever like get through this, I'm going to pay forward what all these writers have given me, you know, when I was kind of recovering, going into the cave and barely talking to anyone, kind of in silence, really introspecting and trying to come back to myself. I was just reading so voraciously, reading all the time, reading. And when I had gotten kind of very far away from myself at the worst times, I was reading less than ever before. So books have just always been this real barometer of like, how am I doing and how can I learn? And yeah, I just wanted to give props to all of them throughout, and people, other ideas of other people to read with other experiences and voices. And I kind of viewed them throughout as like the Greek chorus, almost in the footnotes, like, and you know, the epitaphs and stuff of like, you just see all these echoes from these other writers and these other people's experiences. They're the chorus.
I like that it felt like that. You did it well. Okay, we keep getting questions, so I think we might go over a little bit, but okay, this is from Van. This is a very interesting one. Is the economy a salient component of this lifestyle? I guess, how does the economy influence non-monogamy and lifestyles?
It's an excellent question, and I really recommend a book called Love's Not Colorblind by Kevin Patterson that addresses how race and privilege play out in non-monogamous communities, or racism and privilege, I should say. And, you know, one point that he makes is like, it takes spare resources often to practice non-monogamy, not just, you know, the accommodations of, okay, I'm gonna like get a hotel maybe, or I'm gonna have to travel to see another partner, but also just like time as resource. And how is that going to work if you're working 2 jobs and you're in school and you don't have time for all this healthy communication? And that's not to say that, you know, people with less money don't practice non-monogamy, because they certainly do and have been for a very long time. But just that, yeah, that book's an excellent place to start to understand the role that privilege plays in this. And I think especially for white people, practicing non-monogamy is very important to read as a way to kind of get context, check themselves, see how they can do better, and help foster more inclusivity as well.
I remember when you referenced that book in the book, like you shed a lot of light on the different lenses through which to look at the community, and then also drive to these great books. I'm also just so glad that in the chat, Greenlight is posting links to like every book that you've mentioned, because they carry all these incredible books. So all right, so we have 2 more. So we have one from Krista. How did you take care of yourself while writing open and having to revisit really vulnerable and painful experiences? What are some self-care tips that you'd offer to writers who are working on such personal and difficult topics?
Oh, yeah, great question. Yeah, it was difficult, I'm not gonna lie. And it was over the first period of the pandemic that I was writing a lot of it. But I was very lucky that my current partner, who's named Teo in the book, is a massage therapist. So that was very helpful form of self-care. And he in general is just really amazing rock through all of this, and in every way a person can be. Baking was my other form of self-care. I still pretty much bake something almost every day. And that's where I would like sometimes be writing and I'd be like, why is my pulse beating in my ears? Like, why am I sweating? And I'd be like, oh yeah, duh. Like I'm writing about this super traumatic thing. And so that would be my cue to hopefully step away and just bake something, and kind of work through in silence, kneading the dough, processing. nature and dancing. I dance outside a lot as my favorite thing to do, or dance inside anywhere I could dance, and meditation. Meditation has been a really important thing for me every day.
Those are like amazing answers, and I like wish that I was doing all those things. Okay, so on this is a great question, I think, for us to end on. This is from Shannon. It says, you've done it, you're published. What's next from Rachel?
Oh, I don't know. I would love to have a podcast again. So if anyone wants to, talk about that, hit me up. I think it'll happen. I really miss doing that. And then, yeah, I'm thinking already about the next book, have a few different ideas I'm drawn towards. Right now, one of the main ones is the idea of trying to overcome or confront my fear of death through a very intense new odyssey, sort of a continuation, but yeah, just trying all the therapies and retreats and psychedelics and all of that, and exploring that aspect of things. But we'll see. I don't know what it's gonna be yet.
Whatever it is, I'm so excited.
Thank you.
And also would love for you to start a podcast.
Yes.
Plus one.
And maybe we can do it together, or you'll
Yeah,
definitely.
I was gonna say, please invite me. I will happily come.
Absolutely.
And maybe it should be an advice podcast, because it seems like the questions keep rolling in, and unfortunately we cannot continue the event all night. But thank you so much, both of you. Thank you for everyone who's participated tonight. Please support Greenlight Bookstore and support Rachel and Jen in buying their books. We have open in-store. You can also buy it online. We ship anywhere in the US. For attending tonight's event, you get 10% off. The coupon code's in the chat. Look at all those books. Look at all those books. Jen's poster in the back on her easel, Greedy, is also available at Greenlight.
Oh, sorry, my dog.
Thank you all so much. And for anyone who didn't get to attend tonight, if you have friends who didn't get to come tonight, or you're still waiting to have your question answered, we will be uploading this event to YouTube and maybe even to our podcast. So you can find us there as well. Thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you all. And thank you so much to everyone who came out. I feel the love. Please text me after. Let me know you are here. I love you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.